So today I would like to present to you this very unique and very beautiful silver pocket watch. Now, the maker behind this piece had been somewhat of a mystery. I do believe I do know who was behind the fabrication of this object. Now, I would date this piece to approximately the late 1850s to the early mid 1860s. Now, when we examine the dust cover, we see that there is no place signature, only the name J. Montandon. Now, this does not give us a lot of information. However, it is very possible to compare this with other similar pieces, as these are quite rare. And we will see the way the dial is painted. This is a painted dial. This very ornate, what would one call it, almost arabesque, or these inflections on the Roman numerals. And we do see this prominent serial number, which is on the dial as well as on the movement, or the movement plate, which matches. But there are several of these pieces, and it is interesting that in two of the three pieces that I have located and identified by this maker, we do have a lacking of a place signature. But however, in one piece, which is a near identical twin to this watch, we do have a signature of Geneva or Genève. Now that piece is signed Jules Montandon, Genève. So what we do see in these pieces is that we do find that J. Montandon is most certainly Jules Montandon. And I would like to show you a little bit more the comparison, the methodology that I used to come to this, and I have fairly certainly identified, isolated the possible makers. Now, we will see in later years, certainly almost a generation after this maker, a series of very complicated stopwatches, calendar, moon phase watches, chronographs, chronometers of very complex nature. These signed Jules Montandon Locle. Now, every one of these complex pieces are signed Jules Montandon Locle, and they have a dating of certainly the late 1880s, but 1880, 1890 period, and we see the last of these just in the early 1900s. One of these pieces is has an engraving on the back from, was it 1907, 1908, around this period. So this gives us some information. Now clearly these are two different makers, these Jules Montandons. Now the later Jules always signed Locle, and these were all highly complex watches. Now I would like to share this information with you, and we can see how these differ. And I believe in both cases we are dealing with two different Jules Auguste Montandon, and it is very fascinating. Now they both lived in Locle, and in fact there are two other Jules, a Jules Henry Montandon Blaise-Léon, who was called Montandon de Paris. His father had been in business in Paris, and he was born in Paris, but he later returned to La Chaux-de-Fonds, and he was extremely rich, and he was in the watch business like his father. However, it does not seem that this individual is connected with our watchmaking. Now, he did represent Montandon Frères on the spring side at the 1853-1854 New York exhibition. So we see him there, and later he would go into government, local government, as a municipal councilor in La Chaux-de-Fonds. And by the time he's doing this is already during the 1860s and the 1870s, and he most certainly would have departed from the watchmaking industry. Now, he does seem to be more associated with the springs and the sales of springs and various other components to watches, etc. So it is not exactly clear. It is probably not likely. He could have naturally had an atelier making watches signed with his name. This remains a distant possibility. However, a second individual also from the La Chaux-de-Fonds area. This is Jules Frederick Montandon. Now, he is certainly a watchmaker, and we do find him at least one listing in the Dublin almanacs from the late 1850s, and this appears to be him. And later we do know that he would be in some sort of cooperation or business with Montandon Frères Locle. In fact, he was running Montandon Frères, some sort of office or sales location that they had in Neuchâtel City, and this was around his death. Now, that particular Jules Frederick was also very wealthy. He owned a lot of land in La Chaux-de-Fonds. He owned property in Neuchâtel City, and he was a contributor of, upon his death, he did donate a lot of, or his estate did donate, apparently he was very big in natural science and ornithology, and there was a large collection of birds which were donated to the museum in Neuchâtel. And in fact, they even, the collection was so great that they needed to purchase a special window for this collection for the museum. But now, and the other Jules Henry of La Chaux-de-Fonds, Montandon de Paris, so-called, he was also quite wealthy. And when he died, and now I should mention that Jules Frederick died around, was it 1882, 1884, around in the early mid-1880s. Now, Jules Henry died in 1886. Now, when he died, a huge library of books was donated to a Masonic organization, Locle, and this is an organization that helps with orphans and children, poor children, etc. He dedicated, was it over 2,000 books from his own library to them. And also, we do see in the local press that when Jules Henry died, there was a sale of a huge amount of furniture, clocks, pendulum clocks, etc. Watches even may have been in there. But also he had 1,400 bottles of wine, which was also auctioned. So he had a huge wine cave, apparently. And but he was very wealthy. But so we do have these two individuals, and the Jules Frederick, that when he died in Neuchâtel, he had been running the business, it appears, for the Montandon Frères Neuchâtel location. We see prior to his death that him and his wife were hiring watchmaking professionals to do various tasks at the business. So, I would like to discuss this two early, or a second possibility, which is much more feasible as far as watch fabricators. Now, this is an individual. We find him in Locle. Now, it is interesting that we should note that this was a Jules Auguste Montandon, and he was a repasseur, a remonteur, and this is a very competent watchmaking specialization. These are individuals who have been able to produce and repair pocket watches. Now, this Jules Frederick, I will provide his dates. He was living in Locle. He was an ancien d'église. He was an elder, a church elder in Locle, and he was a watchmaker. And we do find him in Davoine almanacs listed at Au Communal. We find him many years listed at this address. Now, he died in 1873, and this is very interesting because these watches that we have, these earlier Jules Montandon pieces, which are not signed Locle, are in this period that he was doing this work. So he does seem highly likely to have been the candidate, but it is quite interesting that he was not signing with Locle. At least we do not have such watches at this point, or very few. But these remain very elusive, and in fact, these objects are extremely rare. These early Jules Montandon pieces, such as I have here, but and of course the later Jules Montandon Locle complex objects are also quite rare. There are more objects by this maker than the earlier Jules, but these are all rare objects, naturally, as are all Montandon watches. In general, they are extremely rare, but these objects are extremely rarefied, which we are speaking of here, in particular these early J or Jules Montandon pieces. So let us look at some of the information, including more or less the catalog of these pieces, which I have compiled. Now, these objects are not many in number, but I would like to show you them, and we can take it from there. So as we collate the data from the catalog listings which I have amassed, we do see that there are 4 objects that are certainly able to be identified with this first individual. Now, I am speaking of the earlier Jules Auguste Montandon. This is the proposed fabricator of these early pieces. Now, the first of these pieces, this is plausibly the same individual. However, in this case, we have an object which is gold-plated, and this is a cylinder, Lepine movement, cylinder escapement, I believe. There's very little data remaining on the web concerning this piece. However, this is an open-faced gold pocket watch, and it is signed J. Montandon, and there is a locale. There is Neuchâtel. That's Neuchâtel City, more than likely, and the serial number 472. This piece does appear that it dates from this period, circa 1860s to 1870s. Sadly, very little information is left. This is from a 2016 auction that was held by Gray's auctioneers and validators, and validations, I should say. This piece is very intriguing, but when we concentrate on the remaining 3 pieces, which appear to be all of the same hand, we do have this pair of objects, including the one that I possess. Now, these 2 objects, we have serial numbers 14599 and 18429, and these are both signed J. Montandon. However, there's no locale mentioned on these pieces. Now, one of these pieces is with the lower number. This is a Lepine movement again, like number 472, and it is open-faced pocket watch, and the serial number is on the dial. So we have this situation with the serial number on the dial. Now, the case, we will find with this earlier Jules Montandon, he did not sign the dust covers. He only signed either the movement or the movement plate. So we do not find a signature on any of these dust covers. We do not find a signature on the dial, but we do have a serial number on the dial, which is interesting. But this is these are telltale signs that bring us to the same maker. But these are all very similar in characteristics, age, architecture. These are all cylinder escapements. They're open-faced pocket watches. They have unsigned dust covers. And it is interesting also in that these pieces, now they have the silver markings, which these silver markings, I believe they were utilized during the 1860s, and after 1866, then there was a change in the regulation. So this seems to support our theory on the dating. But when we look at the other pocket watch by this early maker, this early Jules, we have object number 11476, and now whereas the dial is not as arabesque as the other two J. Montandon pieces with no locale, but nevertheless, it does seem to fit in this period. And once again, we have a non-signed dust cover. We have a serial number on the dial, and we have this similar plate as the pocket watch in my collection, number 18429. Now, this plate is signed in the same location. In the case of my pocket watch, it is J. Montandon. However, in this case, we have Jules Montandon, and it is Geneva. And this is where we are able to deduce that these J. Montandons all relate to Jules. And when we compare these two watches, it is interesting in that we do seem to see in these these are almost brother watches. Now, of course, the Geneva version does not have the subdial for seconds. However, this is no reason to consider that this is not the same maker. This is just a small difference. And I have seen a possibly a fifth object by this maker. It is another watch exactly in this genre. It is open-faced, and it has the serial number on its dial. However, this was found on the web, and the dial, the serial number on the dial is just incomprehensible. It's not able to be read. However, it does appear to fit in this serialization, that it does appear that the first digit is a 1, and so this is something in the teen thousands, something between 11,000 and 18,000 most certainly. So we do have these close proximity of these serializations, and this is very interesting. It would be very nice to see the rest of that watch. However, there's only a frontal picture of this piece, and the picture is very grainy, and it is very difficult to extrapolate more data. Now, these later pieces, we do have, as we can see in my list, object number 5, number 13311. This is an object which is signed merely J. Montandon Locle. And this has a FHF style movement. This appears to be an object from 1880 on. And this is a gray area, but the proposed individual who would have been fabricating under J and Jules, he would have died by this time. And clearly, I think that this is this serialization here. This is a different maker who also was signing J. Montandon and Jules Montandon, but he routinely signs Locle. And this is a generation later.
This is 15 to 25 years after the original maker, and this is the most simple of all of these later objects. However, these are all complex watches. These are watches with multiple complications, Locle style movements, repeater watches, chronograph and stopwatches, moon phase calendar chronometers, etc. And these, in general, have a 4-digit serial number. And we see this up until the beginning of the 20th century. And then there are 3 objects that are right around the cusp of the 20th century and just over. These pieces are certainly by a different maker. This would have been a professional who was adept at these levels of sophistication in watchmaking. And this individual, who I suspect is the fabricator behind these pieces, as this individual is not listed in Davoine almanacs. However, we do know that there is a Jules Montandon who was a visiteur, and this is Jules Auguste Montandon. We find his genealogical information. He was born in 1851 and died in 1907. He was a resident of Locle. He was born and died there. And let me just say that a visiteur, this is a very complex specialization. We have the following definition. A visiteur in watchmaking can assemble complex movement components, dress the watch movements, and machine defective or missing parts. Therefore, he is also repairing such. He can sell timepieces and intervene on the restoration of old pieces. He is also competent to coordinate a team and lead a structure. So this is somebody who is able to oversee an entire watch production. And this particular Jules Auguste is genealogically listed as a visiteur. So this would have been a class above. This would have been a high watch fabricator with the technical capability to be able to handle such pieces. And it is most likely that this is the individual who was signing Jules Montandon Locle. Now, I had mentioned earlier that there were these earlier Jules Montandons who died during the 1880s. Certainly by 1886, the second one had died. And with this Jules Henry, we do see a list of the municipal councilors of the city of La Chaux-de-Fonds, as he was a municipal councilor. And we find that he was in this role between 1861 to 1865, and later in 1872. So clearly he had departed more or less the watch business. Now, he did own a lot of land in La Chaux-de-Fonds. In fact, if you read Davoine almanacs, you will see him mentioned as propriétaire, or he was a proprietor of a slew of addresses, which were originally acquired by his father, Charles, and then he took possession of them after the death of his father. But these were all properties which would later be distributed among his survivors. But he was definitely a wealthy man. He could have had watches being produced under his name, which he would sell as a business. So we must mention him, but it is not likely that he was fabricating such pieces. And all of the earlier watches which we have discussed in this 1860s, 1870s period, these are all silver watches, and one would expect him, if Jules Henry was involved in some sort of watch selling business, that would have been more on the elite side, golden, complex, very fine pieces. But this does need to be mentioned. However, we do have these two interesting Jules Montandons. It does seem that these are grouped among two different makers. Now, there were other J. Montandons in La Chaux-de-Fonds, certainly in the 1890s, and we do know there was one of the sons of one of the individuals associated with Montandon furs, an Auguste, his son, James, was also in the watch business. Now, they were both regulators. They were they would regulate watches, in particular breguet movements, but they were involved in this fine tuning, more or less. So he could have made watches, but certainly he is less likely to have been part of this. And his name was James. Now, this watch 13311, J. Montandon Locle, it's a very plausible that this could be a James. However, it does seem odd that there would be multiple individuals signing J. Montandon Locle at the same time, that this would almost be a type of this name signing would almost acquire a certain proprietorship, that they would be this would be almost like their ownership, that when one signs in this particular fashion, we're basically dealing with a single watch fabricator, and this would not be replicated at the same time. This is where we begin to see other signings such as Montandon Geneva, Montandon Locle, these much more generic signings that are generally the signs of these smaller makers. But this was just a little bit of an explanation of this and a deep dive into this very fascinating and very rare watch fabricator, Jules Montandon, also signing J. Montandon, and often without a location, but also to present these complex pieces by Jules Montandon Locle a generation afterwards. So I hope this was informative, and I would look forward to your questions, comments, and feedback as usual. Thank you, and have a very nice weekend.